You're listening to an Airwave Media Podcast.
Feel like who art Ed?
Try to slice it.
Who art is Mr. Wood art Ed me?
Good. Either way, it's ambiguous. It works on so many levels.
I know.
That's off to a great start.
Welcome to Who Arted, weekly art history for all ages. I'm your host, Kyle Wood, and today we're looking at the Brazilian modernist painter Tarsila do Amaral. Tarsila do Amaral was born in 1886 in Capivari, a small town in the state of Sao Paulo, Brazil. She grew up on her family's wealthy coffee plantation, an experience that would later inspire the vibrant colors and natural themes of her work. As a young woman from a privileged background, she received her education in both Brazil and Europe, studying in Barcelona. Though she began her art studies in Brazil, it wasn't until 1920, when she moved to Paris, that her artistic vision truly began to take shape. In Paris, she studied with the great masters of Cubism, including Fernand Léger and André Lahotte, soaking up the avant-garde ideas that were revolutionizing European art. When Tarsila returned to Brazil, she brought these new ideas with her. She joined a group of innovative artists and writers known as the Grupo dos Cinco, or the Group of Five, which included the influential writers Oswald de Andrade and Mario de Andrade. Together, they aimed to create a new form of art that was both modern and distinctly Brazilian. Tarsila's art became the visual cornerstone of this movement. Her work is often divided into two phases, starting with the Pau-Brasil phase, which celebrated the landscapes and people of Brazil, followed by her most famous, the Antropofagia or cannibalist phase, which proposed symbolically devouring foreign culture to create something new. Later in her life, after the stock market crash of 1929 wiped out her family's fortune, Tarsila's art took a turn. A trip to the Soviet Union in 1931 exposed her to socialist ideals, and she began painting large-scale canvases depicting the social struggles of the Brazilian working class. Although her style evolved throughout her career, Tarsila do Amaral is forever remembered as the foundational figure of modernism in Brazil. She helped Brazil find its own artistic voice, creating a legacy that continues to influence artists today. Now, here are 5 quick things to know about Tarsila do Amaral. Number 1. Although she is an icon of modern Brazilian art, Tarsila missed the most important event in Brazilian modern art history. In February 1922, the Semana de Arte Moderna, or the Week of Modern Art, was held in Sao Paulo. This festival of music, poetry, and visual art was a revolutionary event that officially kicked off the modernist movement in Brazil, challenging the country's conservative, European-style art establishment. At the time, Tarsila was in Paris, finishing her studies. The friends she had made, like Oswald de Andrade, were key figures in the Semana. When she returned to Brazil later that year, she was immediately welcomed into the inner circle of the modernist revolution. She quickly absorbed the movement's ideals, and with her European training and uniquely Brazilian perspective, she began producing the art that would come to define the movement. Number 2. Her most famous painting was a birthday gift that kind of started an entire artistic movement. In 1928, Tarsila wanted to give a special birthday present to her husband, the writer Oswald de Andrade. She secretly painted a canvas featuring a bizarre, solitary figure with a gigantic foot and a tiny head sitting next to a cactus under the blazing sun. When she showed it to Oswald, he was stunned, but also fascinating. He asked, "What is this?" and immediately declared it was the best painting she had ever made. That painting, which we'll discuss a little later, was named Abaporu, an indigenous Tupi-Guarani term meaning man who eats. Inspired by this powerful, primitive image, Oswald de Andrade wrote the Manifesto Antropofago, or the Cannibalist Manifesto. This manifesto became the founding document for the Antropofagia movement, which argued that Brazilian artists should devour European influences, digest them, and regurgitate them as something uniquely and powerfully Brazilian. So you might say that single birthday gift helped to launch an entire cultural revolution. And number 3. Tarsila created her own signature color palette inspired by the countryside. Tarsila felt that the European art education she received had suppressed her true colors. She once said that she was, quote, frightened of caipira painting, end quote, using the Portuguese word caipira, which means rustic, rural, or hick. She associated the bright, bold colors of her homeland with being unsophisticated. But during a trip back home in Brazil, she had an epiphany. She fell in love with the folk art, the brightly painted houses, and the traditional festivals she saw. From that point on, she embraced what she called caipira colors. She intentionally used a palette of pure, vibrant hues that she felt represented the true Brazil. Pure blues, violet rose, vivid yellows and greens. Rejecting the somber, muted tones of traditional European art, Tarsila created a visual language that was unapologetically Brazilian, full of life and energy. Number 4. Tarsila was also a celebrated fashion icon in Paris. While living in Paris during the Roaring '20s, Tarsila was known not only for her groundbreaking art, but also her incredible sense of style. She was a true fashionista, embracing the latest trends and frequenting the studios of the most famous haute couture designers of the day. Her elegant and modern appearance, often captured in famous photographs, was an essential part of her artistic persona. And it wasn't just about looking good, it was a statement. At the time, many Europeans held stereotypical views of South Americans as being, quote, primitive and unsophisticated. Tarsila's glamorous presence in the heart of the European art world directly challenged those prejudices. By presenting herself as a chic, worldly woman, she asserted her place and the place of Brazilian art on the international stage, proving that modernity and sophistication were not exclusive to Europe. And number 5, a crater on the planet Mercury is named after Tarsila do Amaral. Tarsila's influence extends not just beyond Brazil, but beyond our planet. In 2008, the International Astronomical Union, the group responsible for naming celestial bodies, officially named a crater on Mercury Amaral. This is a huge honor, as craters on Mercury are exclusively named for deceased artists, musicians, painters, and authors who have made outstanding or fundamental contributions to their field for more than 50 years. The Amaral crater is about 66 miles or 106 kilometers in diameter. It sits among craters named after other cultural giants like Beethoven, Shakespeare, and Tolstoy. This cosmic recognition cements Tarsila do Amaral's status not just as a Brazilian icon, but as a globally significant artist whose vision and impact are quite literally out of this world. Now, today I want to take a closer look at the piece I mentioned earlier, Abaporu, painted in 1928. It's oil on canvas, and it's among the most famous paintings in Brazilian history. As I said earlier, the name comes from the indigenous Tupi-Guarani language and means man who eats. The Antropofagia movement took the slogan, Tupi or not Tupi, that is the question. It was sort of a playful twist on Shakespeare's Hamlet. The idea being that for too long, Brazil had been copying European culture, and it was time to instead take things in a new way, consuming to digest the bits, but ultimately grow into something different, bigger, and better. The painting seems fairly simple at first. The composition is dominated by a single monumental figure, but the proportions are a bit odd. The head is tiny, the arm and leg majorly elongated, there's a giant foot in the foreground. The figure is also painted in a way that gives some sense of form, but It's strange, almost shaded like a cylinder. It's basically tube-like limbs rather than the irregular organic forms we would see in a classical figure. They're sitting on a green patch of earth, just one massive hand and one even more enormous foot planted firmly on the ground, suggesting a connection to the land. The figure's torso and arm are elongated and fluid, while the head is tiny, so small it feels like just like an afterthought thrown into the composition. The head is sort of tilted back, looking up towards the sky, maybe in thought, but seemingly disconnected from that powerful earthbound body. To the right stands a single stylized green cactus, a mandacaru, which is a plant native to arid regions of Brazil, and often a symbol of resilience. We see a golden sun in the sky, although some see it as a ripe fruit hanging from the cactus, symbolizing a fruitful land. The story behind the creation of this painting is central to its identity. It was a private gift that became a public manifesto. When Tarsila painted it for her husband, she created a symbol for an idea that hadn't even been articulated yet. The image of the primitive, distorted, and yet powerful being rooted in the Brazilian soil became the perfect emblem of Oswald's theory of cultural cannibalism. Abaporu, the man who eats, embodied this idea of absorbing outside forces to strengthen one's own identity. Today, it is seen as a national treasure and an icon of Latin American modernism. It represents a declaration of cultural independence. With its distorted form, it rejects the classical European ideals of beauty. With its bold colors, it celebrates the Brazilian landscape. And with its powerful name and symbolism, it champions the idea of forging a unique identity from a complex mix of influences. It's a masterpiece not just because of what we see on the canvas, but how it gives us a window into the ideas that were shaping the culture at this time.
This concludes this week's episode of Who Arted, part of the Airwave Media Podcast Network. If you found this tolerable, please leave a rating or review on your favorite podcast app. You can find images of the work being discussed this week and every week on social media at Who Arted Podcast on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok, and of course on the website whoartedpodcast.com. Podcast done.